In 1979, the world watched as the Soviet Union launched a full-scale invasion of Afghanistan, sending shockwaves through the global community and igniting a brutal conflict that would last for a decade. Soviet tanks rolled across the rugged Afghan terrain, their presence marking the beginning of a war that would devastate the country and draw in superpowers from around the globe. The human cost was staggering. Over 1 million Afghans lost their lives, and millions more were forced to flee their homes, becoming refugees in neighboring countries. Families were torn apart, entire villages destroyed, and the scars of violence etched deep into the nation's memory. When the Soviets finally withdrew in 1989, Afghanistan was left in ruins. Instead of peace, the country descended into chaos as rival warlords battled for control, plunging the nation into a bloody civil war. Amidst the turmoil, a new force emerged, the Taliban, promising order but delivering a harsh and repressive rule. The world's attention returned to Afghanistan after the September 11th attacks. The United States, determined to dismantle terrorist networks, invaded in 2001. What followed was a 20-year military campaign, with American and Allied forces pouring in troops, resources, and over $2 trillion, all in the hope of building a stable, democratic Afghanistan. But after 2 decades, the U.S. withdrew in 2021, leaving behind a country still searching for peace. The evidence of endless conflict is everywhere you look: ruined cities, shattered homes, and generations of Afghans who have known nothing but war. The landscape itself seems to bear witness to the suffering, with bombed-out villages and children growing up amidst the rubble. Yet, amid the destruction, there was one project that stood out for its ambition and cost. Here's the twist: the most expensive U.S. project in Afghanistan wasn't a weapon, a military base, or a secret operation. It was a highway, the Ring Road, a massive infrastructure project designed to connect the country's major cities and unite its people. The Ring Road was meant to be a symbol of progress and unity, a lifeline that would bring economic growth and stability. But instead, it became a symbol of wasted money, corruption, and broken promises. Construction was plagued by delays, attacks, and mismanagement, leaving large sections unfinished or unsafe to travel. Today, the Ring Road stands as a haunting metaphor for foreign intervention in Afghanistan: grand plans, enormous spending, and a journey that ultimately led nowhere. The empty stretches of highway cutting through the mountains are a stark reminder of dreams that never materialized. Every empire that has entered Afghanistan has arrived with big ideas and bold ambitions, but time and again, the country's complex history, rich culture, and fiercely independent people have pushed back against outside control, refusing to be shaped by foreign hands. The Soviets tried to impose socialism, believing they could transform Afghan society through ideology and force. The Americans, decades later, tried to bring democracy, investing billions in aid, training, and nation-building efforts. But both superpowers failed to win the hearts and minds of a population that has always valued its autonomy and resisted foreign domination. The Afghan people, through centuries of conflict, have shown a remarkable ability to endure and to push back against those who would try to control their destiny. Afghanistan's story is a powerful warning to the world. Outsiders may arrive with grand visions and promises of change, but in the end, it is the land and its people who have the final say. The mountains, valleys, and plains have witnessed countless invasions, yet the spirit of Afghanistan endures. And through it all, the cost of these endless struggles is always borne most heavily by ordinary Afghans, the families, children, and communities who pay the highest price for the ambitions of others. Christmas Eve, 1979. The Soviets invade, claiming to help a struggling ally. They install their own leader, expecting gratitude and quick success. But Afghanistan wasn't just a country to occupy. It was a fiercely independent society, rooted in Islam and tribal loyalty. The Soviets' help was seen as an attack on faith and tradition. What was meant to be a short intervention became a decade-long quagmire, draining Soviet resources and morale. The friendly visit became the Soviet Union's Vietnam, accelerating its collapse. The Afghan Mujahideen, ordinary people, farmers, shopkeepers, students, and even teenagers, rose up against the mighty Soviet military machine. They came from all walks of life, united by a single purpose: to defend their homeland from foreign occupation. For many, the fight was not just about territory, but about protecting their families, their faith, and their way of life. They weren't a unified army with a single commander or a strict chain of command. Instead, they were a patchwork of local groups, each led by its own leader. but all sharing a common cause: resistance. Despite their differences, their determination to defend their land and faith bound them together in a powerful, if sometimes chaotic, alliance. The world took notice. The US and other countries funneled weapons, supplies, and money to the Mujahideen, hoping to turn Afghanistan into the Soviets' own Vietnam. The introduction of the Stinger missile was a game-changer. Suddenly, Soviet helicopters, once symbols of unstoppable power, became vulnerable targets, and the balance of power began to shift. The Mujahideen's greatest weapons, however, were not just the arms they received, but their deep knowledge of the land and their unbreakable will. They used guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run attacks, ambushes, and sabotage, making the most of Afghanistan's unforgiving terrain. Every mountain pass, every narrow valley became a potential trap for Soviet forces. They struck quickly, then melted away into the mountains, leaving Soviet troops frustrated and exhausted. For the invaders, every road was a potential ambush, every village a possible stronghold of resistance. The Mujahideen's ability to disappear into the landscape made them almost impossible to defeat. The Soviets had overwhelming firepower, advanced technology, and sheer numbers on their side. But the Mujahideen had something even more powerful: the home advantage and the support of local communities who provided shelter, food, and intelligence. The war dragged on, turning into a series of small, brutal, and costly battles. Each skirmish chipped away at Soviet morale and resources, slowly bleeding the superpower dry. The cost, in lives, money, and reputation, became too great to bear. The lesson was clear: even the mightiest armies can be undone by determined locals fighting for their homes, their families, and their beliefs. The Mujahideen's resilience became legendary, inspiring resistance movements around the world. The world watched in awe and disbelief as a global superpower was humbled by 1,000 small cuts. News reports and images of the conflict reached every corner of the globe, changing perceptions of what it meant to be an underdog. 2 decades later, history would repeat itself. Another superpower would enter Afghanistan, only to discover that the spirit of resistance and the lessons of the past were still very much alive. In 1989, the Soviets left, but peace didn't follow. The Mujahideen, united only by a common enemy, turned on each other. Civil war erupted, with warlords battling for control and Kabul reduced to rubble. Ordinary Afghans, desperate for order, suffered under chaos and corruption. The power vacuum became fertile ground for extremism. The failure to build a stable government left Afghans disillusioned and desperate for change. Out of this chaos, a new force would soon emerge. In 1994, the Taliban emerged, promising order and strict Islamic law. Many Afghans, exhausted by war, welcomed them at first. The Taliban quickly took over, but their rule was harsh: no music, no school for girls, brutal punishments. They gave sanctuary to Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, letting them plan attacks from Afghan soil. The world mostly ignored Afghanistan's suffering, until 9/11. The Taliban's alliance with terrorists turned Afghanistan into a global target. Their promise of order came at a terrible price. The regime's brutality and extremism isolated the country and set the stage for the next invasion. The violence at home would soon spill far beyond Afghanistan's borders. In the aftermath of 9/11, the world watched as the United States issued a stark ultimatum to the Taliban: surrender Osama bin Laden, or face the consequences. The Taliban, defiant and unyielding, refused to comply, setting the stage for a new era of conflict in Afghanistan. By October 2001, the US and its allies launched Operation Enduring Freedom. The campaign began with relentless airstrikes, targeting Taliban strongholds and infrastructure. But this was not just an air war. On the ground, American special forces and CIA operatives joined forces with local Afghan militias, forging uneasy alliances to topple the Taliban regime. The Taliban's grip on power crumbled with surprising speed. Within weeks, Kabul fell, and Taliban fighters melted away into the rugged mountains, leaving behind empty compounds and a city in shock. Their leaders vanished into the vast, unforgiving terrain, evading capture. For a moment, it seemed like a swift and decisive victory. But the real prize, Osama bin Laden, slipped through the cracks, escaping across the border into Pakistan. The world's most wanted man was still at large, and the conflict was far from resolved. The US had succeeded in toppling the Taliban regime, but their main objective remained unfulfilled. The sense of triumph was quickly overshadowed by the realization that the mission was incomplete. As American troops pushed deeper into Afghanistan's mountains and valleys, it became clear that the war was entering a new, more complicated phase. The initial invasion was over, but the insurgency was just beginning to take shape. Now, the daunting task of rebuilding Afghanistan loomed large. U.S. forces and aid workers faced the challenge of restoring order, rebuilding shattered communities, and preventing the resurgence of terrorist groups. Winning hearts and minds would prove as difficult as any battle. But Afghanistan's history is a cycle of intervention and resistance. As foreign troops settled in, old wounds reopened, and new insurgencies began to form. The ghosts of past invasions haunted every step, as Afghans remembered the Soviet occupation and braced for another long struggle. The U.S. now faced the same daunting landscape, the same fiercely independent and decentralized society, and the same harsh realities that had defeated so many invaders before. Afghanistan's mountains and valleys had become a proving ground for empires, and few had ever truly succeeded. The so-called easy part, the rapid military victory, was over. What lay ahead was a long, exhausting struggle, testing the resolve of soldiers and leaders alike. In Afghanistan, history has a way of repeating itself. As the world would soon learn, the hardest battles were yet to come. With the Taliban gone, the U.S. tried to rebuild Afghanistan. New government, elections, schools, and roads. Billions poured in, and for a moment hope returned. Girls in school, women working, a free press. But corruption, weak government, and resurgent warlords undermined progress. The Taliban regrouped in Pakistan, launching a deadly insurgency funded by the opium trade. The U.S. and NATO won battles but couldn't win the war for hearts and minds. Attempts to impose a centralized, Western-style government clashed with Afghanistan's decentralized reality. The same mistakes as the Soviets, just with more money and better PR. Nation-building proved far harder than toppling a regime. The war dragged on, becoming America's longest and most expensive conflict. Tens of thousands died, trillions were spent. Peace talks led to a U.S. Taliban deal focused on withdrawal, not lasting stability. In 2021, as U.S. troops left, the Afghan army collapsed almost overnight. The Taliban retook Kabul without a fight. The government vanished. Scenes of chaos at the airport symbolized the mission's failure. After 20 years, the Taliban were back in power. The cycle had come full circle. The world was left asking, what was it all for? Afghanistan's fate was once again in Afghan hands. Today, we look back at a history that repeats itself. Superpowers invade, try to reshape Afghanistan, and fail, every time. The graveyard of empires isn't just a nickname, it's a warning. Outsiders' good intentions often plant the seeds for the next crisis. Real change can't be imposed, it must come from within. Afghanistan's future will be decided by Afghans, not foreign armies or aid. The lesson is humility, respect the complexity, or pay the price, again and again. History doesn't offer easy answers, but in Afghanistan it offers a very clear warning.